but a lot of them are down there, kind of Texas, Louisiana, on the coast. And here's the critical thing.
We've officially entered one of the most pivotal moments in Canadian history. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today we're going to break down the situation of oil out of Venezuela, how long this will take to affect Canada, how bad really is this? Because if Mark Carney doesn't do the right things right now, Canada will be in trouble in the future. Let's jump into this. Starting this one off, we've got Mark Carney losing one of his MPs. That would be Nate Erskine-Smith. This seems very likely here. So he's got this post here on his blog where he touches on stepping down for the Ontario Liberal leadership race here. Biggest question mark for 2026 is the Ontario Liberal leadership race. It's a huge opportunity to make a difference, which is why I ran last time, and it's past time for change. We shouldn't accept the Ford government's obvious mediocrity, incompetence, and corruption. We don't know the timeline of the race yet, but we're now building a team, one that is ready to run, win, and govern together. Everything depends on the strength of the team, including the decision to join the race when it's officially called. So basically, I think everyone's sitting around waiting to see if Nate Erskine-Smith is going to join, because the previous election, Bonnie Crombie won as the mayor of Mississauga, but only by a few percentage points. You can see 53%. Nate Erskine-Smith got nearly 47%, and now Bonnie Crombie's gone. I don't think anyone wants to challenge Nate Erskine-Smith on this, so likely he will be running, he will be stepping down. Will this affect anything all that much? Well, kind of. It doesn't look good for Carney having anyone step down. We got to remember, Canadians aren't paying attention, so they might think, oh, Carney's not doing a good job. I guess he lost one of his MPs, when in really, he's just running for Liberal leadership in Ontario. And looking on 388 here, I mean, this is basically a Liberal stronghold. Beaches, East York, this is Nate Erskine-Smith's riding, 58%, Conservatives at 22%. So really, it's just going to be another Liberal that takes this over, but there will be a little bit of bad optics for Mark Carney just having someone stepping down. Of course, the media won't attack him for it, but most Canadians aren't paying attention anyways. And you can see he is trying to gather people for this, so he's really serious about this, with almost certainty that he will be running in this race. With that, we have the most recent poll here, this one from Liaison Strategies from a couple of days ago. This shows Doug Ford at 44%. This is Ontario provincial polling. Liberals at 35% and NDP at 16%. But really, if you think about this, if Nate is able to pull people from the NDP, he could beat Doug Ford in the next election. I mean, Nate Erskine-Smith and Eco Warrior are pretty open about that. I see this as a real possibility here. So Doug Ford better watch out. He might actually have someone that can contend against him. Not like I think Nate Erskine-Smith is that good, but for the left, they do think he's good. We know that from this polling data here. Moving ahead, it's time to talk about oil. So I've been looking into this, the whole situation with Venezuela. There's been a bunch of talk of Donald Trump, said it himself. They want to open up oil production in Venezuela. There's 303 billion barrels of oil sitting there, the highest reserves on planet Earth, but it's not quite as simple as just having the companies fire up production there and exporting that oil, and then they'll reduce Canada's oil. It's not quite that simple, but this is a hinge moment in Canadian history here, and Mark Carney needs to do the right thing. I don't think he's going to do that, obviously. So who do we have here? Razor Oil. Well, this guy, here's his YouTube channel. It's this guy here. It's not Razor Ramon. As he opened with this post, he's a heavy oil expert, 18 patents in heavy oil production technology development and optimizations, prior experience as a senior technical SME at a super major US oil company that Venezuela still owes money to. So it's either ExxonMobil or ConocoPhillips. It's one of those two. And so he says he wants to correct some things about what's being said on X about Venezuelan oil. Venezuela has a ton of oil. He goes to say those figures do not translate directly into immediate production flows or rapid incremental increases, which demand substantial time and investment. With the next big budget not arriving until Q3, US producers are currently committed to ongoing projects and contractual obligations. Venezuelans' oil uniquely faces geology, low ultimate recovery rates, and severe infrastructure deficits. So basically their oil is super sour crude. It's very heavy. It's hard to get it out of the ground. The flow rate is really bad. For that reason, it takes a lot of money to get that oil out of the ground. So it's not just this simple solution of just getting the companies down there, pumping the oil out, and bada bing, bada boom. It's in really hard to work areas. We have a map of it here. You can see Venezuela's oil infrastructure and shadow fleet. So we've got refineries, which are these logos here, refinery there and there. We've got upgraders here, terminals here, and all these. And then you can see all those lines here are all pipelines, and then oil fields. This all connects to the north coast of Venezuela. Venezuela being right here, so all this oil would be loaded into ships here, and that's pretty simple to send that across the Gulf of Mexico or America here to all the refineries that are down here in Houston. So this is something that is doable, but getting the oil out of the ground in Venezuela is not as simple as it may seem. Razor here goes on to say, from my work alongside Venezuelans who actually operated projects here, many cited rampant corruption and logistical nightmares as reasons they left the country. At current oil prices, the massive capital required for meaningful production growth simply isn't justified. One leading expert and a good friend estimates it would take at least 3 years to double output, adding about 1 million barrels per day. So not by next week. So it's not this like simple thing, they flick the switch and boom, the oil's back. We're looking at a 3-year timeline before there would be a reduction in Canadian oil coming out of Alberta. And he goes on to say, unlike Canada, Venezuela has 0 SAGD projects, 0. Any greenfield heavy oil development there would require at least 30,000 per flow barrel, meaning roughly 1 billion for every 30,000 barrels per day increment achieved in perhaps 3 years. So this is not a simple slam dunk here. Now I do want to ping pong back and forth with this video here. This was released by Sky News explaining the whole situation of oil with the knowledge of these oil professionals just to tie this all together. So how they started this off just talking about America's rise in oil production here. By 2011, America got into fracking and then just absolutely exploded past the Saudis and everyone else. Venezuela has gone down.
They're one of the minnows now, and I think 21st biggest producer in the world. So again, that question, why should America care? Well, in the US, that big rise is largely down to this. It's down to the shale revolution. So you've got fracking all around the US producing extraordinary amounts of crude oil. Here's where we get to the interesting bit. Because when you're thinking about crude oil, maybe you're just thinking about, well, look, barrels of oil. It's all the same, isn't it? Well, actually, no. So if you kind of look at crude oil, there are various different types of crude in different parts of the world. There's actually kind of various different ways you can categorize it. But one way you can look at it is look at the kind of density. So you're basically looking at how thick that crude is. And when I say thick, I mean literally how thick. This is showing you global production broken down by the density of that oil. And so you've got the kind of medium stuff. And this is probably, if you've got a kind of image in your mind of what crude oil looks like, it's a bit like this, you know, it's kind of black, but it's not too viscous, it flows around. But there's other stuff as well. So this is light crude, and it kind of almost looks like a smoothie, doesn't it? And that's the same stuff. This is still crude oil, but down to the kind of geological and the biological conditions in the ground when it was being formed, you know, hundreds of millions of years ago, it comes out looking a bit different. And so that's light. You've also got heavy stuff, and it's kind of relatively small in global production, but this is gloopy, super viscous stuff, heavy oil. So
You can see how thick that stuff is. So in Venezuela, often I believe they have to inject certain chemicals and stuff to get this to actually flow, which then increases the production costs. And in some of these areas are mountainous and very hard to work in. That's why this isn't a simple slam dunk of jacking up production, but it can happen over time if the conditions are right. And Canada needs to pivot right now. We need to be building pipelines and opening up our exports worldwide, which will provide us better prices. So then if America does drop their need for Canadian oil, we won't be left hung out to dry. As Razor points out here, Canadian oil will be just fine. To Canadian politicians, diversify market access effing right now. Thank you for your attention on this matter. And that's what we have here with this post. This shows the pipeline here from Edmonton to Hardisty all the way down to Houston, where that oil goes, gets refined and shipped out around the world. So at this point, we should be connecting one across Canada over here to the East Coast. We need Energy East. We also need one to Prince Rupert. We should be adding another line in Trans Mountain. But of course, Carney's not going to do that. So we're pretty screwed here unless we can get rid of Carney ASAP, which hopefully we will be able to do.
And remember also, the key thing here is you get it out of the ground, it may look like that, but ultimately you still need it to go into, someone's car, or indeed, be turned into chemicals. Basically, you need to process it. And that processing, that happens in places like this, in refineries. And there are refineries all over the world, of course. There are refineries all over the US as well. There's kind of more than 100 of them. And if we kind of look at where those refineries are, well, so there's some in California. So the history in America, actually, historically, a lot of the early Californian oil, that was the heavy, gloopy stuff. And if you look at kind of some of the refineries in America, so here are some of the refineries. There's one in LA there. These are the 10 biggest. You've got some up here around kind of towards Canada. We'll kind of come to that in a second. But a lot of them are down there, kind of Texas, Louisiana, on the coast. And here's the critical thing. These refineries are primarily set up for heavy oil, for taking that gloopy stuff and turning it into gasoline and all of the other different products. But here's where things get interesting. And remember that chart I showed you a moment ago, the one which showed kind of shale oil and how it kind of went through the roof? The oil that's generally produced with shale oil, the fracking oil, that comes out of the ground mostly in the light form. So it's the smoothie. It's sometimes actually even clear. It comes out of the ground clear rather than black. And that's the majority of American production right now. Shale oil tends to be light stuff. And actually, that's kind of going back 10 years. Look at where we are now. Look at those bars. In the last few years, the amount of light oil being produced in the US has gone up and up and up, and the amount of kind of heavy stuff has gone down. But back to those refineries. They need to be fed. If America's going to have gasoline, it needs to feed those refineries with heavy oil. So if you look at the kind of imports coming into America, in recent years, even though America is producing so much oil, more oil than it ever produced before, it still needs to suck in loads of oil from overseas. And the type of oil we're talking about, it used to be, it's mostly heavy crude. It used to be only 12%. So only 12% of imports were heavy, gloopy crude. Now, it's about 70%. So 70% of the oil coming into America, which it needs to basically keep its economy going, is heavy crude. And where does...
This is where Mark Carney should be using leverage, that they need Canadian Alberta oil, that heavy crude, to keep all those fineries running down in Houston. They process that, they make a ton of money. Like, this is where negotiating chips are. I mean, get Keystone XL set up. Let's send them some more oil. On top of that, let's build one out to Prince Rupert and all of it. We can protect ourselves as a nation and make a lot of money in the process. Unfortunately, we got the wrong guy as Prime Minister right now.
Heavy crude come from? Well, here are some of the big countries where you find most of it. It's Canada and Venezuela. There's one other I'll come to in a second, which we'll come back to. But it's Canada and it's Venezuela where you get most of this heavy crude oil, which is why, back to think about where those refineries are, they're mostly set up kind of, you've got some in the north there to get the heavy oil coming out of Canada, and you've got some around the kind of Louisiana and elsewhere and Texas to get that heavy oil that comes in from Venezuela. That was kind of the way they were set up. And it's really expensive to rebuild these things. You can't just chuck out a refinery very easily overnight. Some came from Mexico and the Gulf of Mexico as well, and that was pretty heavy too. So that's the picture in America. And the upshot is, even though America is producing more and more oil, the imports, this is showing you imports of oil into America, are still really high. And if you break down those imports by the country that stuff is coming from, well, there's Venezuela, and it used to be a decent slug. Actually, more came from Venezuela just about than from Canada, just at the turn of the millennium. But now look at what's happened since. Right now, Canada has gone from 15% of all of the US imports of oil to 61%. 61%. And Venezuela's basically next to nothing.
And that's just the problem. If they fire everything up, repair those refineries and get them running full steam, we could lose 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of all our oil production. Potentially, who knows, maybe even more. So with that, we've got people doing the math here. I mean, look at the cost to fix all the infrastructure. Export terminal, $8 billion. Import refresh, $1 billion, $10 billion, $75 billion, $6 billion, etc. We've got this chart here that shows us the U.S. crude quality domestic production versus imports. And this part here is, as it says, replacing. This is the Canadian oil, Canadian imports. This dark blue here. So it would be a ton to replace. So they're not going to be able to replace all of it. It might take a decade or more to try to replace all Canada's oil. Not like they'd really want to. I'm sure they want to have access, but it would be awful if they cut the amount they were buying from us by 50%. As this guy here, Michael Spiker, is posting, he says, I think it's nearly $1 trillion bill to get that done. I'm not sure who has a spare $1 trillion in their jeans. Venezuela's natural domestic consumption is 1 million barrels per day. And to completely replace 3 million barrels per day export capacity, the country needs to grow by 4 million barrels per day production level. So it would take a lot of effort, a lot of money to do this. So this is not something that's going to be awful for our country tomorrow or next week or next month. But a year from now, we might see a drop in 5 or 10%. And 2 years from now, it might be more than that. In 3 years, we might be really hurting if we don't do the right things right now. This is the most pivotal moment with oil production probably in Canada's history right now, based on what Trump and his administration work out in Venezuela and how Mark Carney responds to this. I'm a little worried for our country right now because we have a net zero zealot running our country. So he's obviously not going to increase oil production or build a new pipeline. We've got this guy here, Dr. Robert Rode, chief scientist at Berkeley Earth, physics PhD and data nerd. This guy says when you hear Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves, remember that 2/3 of that comes from the Chavez and Maduro governments using generous assumptions to reclassify large volumes of lower utility heavy crude as recoverable. So potentially they could be lying, as well as that oil is very hard to get out of the ground.
But here's what's tantalizing, and here's the reason I think that a lot of people are looking towards Venezuela and thinking, well, there's more to this than just drugs. Look at total oil reserves around the world. The higher these bars are, the more oil there is in the ground, so that hasn't yet been taken out of the ground. So there you've got Saudi, Iran, Iraq, all of the usual suspects. But the biggest of all, and this is according to various different sources, the biggest of all is Venezuela. And what's that oil? It's the heavy, tarry stuff that you might well want to put into those American refineries. And there is really only one other place in the world that has a kind of serious amount of heavy oil other than Canada and Venezuela. And lo and behold, guess where that is? It's Russia. All of which is to say, it matters what kind of oil America needs. It's worth just delving into these kind of nuances because that helps you understand a little bit more about the backstory of geopolitics.
There was an account here on X that said, because Donald Trump went into Venezuela, he's convinced that a secret deal has been made between Donald Trump and Putin on the whole conflict with Ukraine and that it's over. This would be a secret deal that will roll out in the next, who knows, 2 or 3, 4 weeks, a month or so. And that's why he had the confidence to go in on Venezuela. But I mean, you got to look too. China just had another meeting there. Trump is tired of it because China and Iran are using Venezuela as a staging ground to unload their street candy, the chemicals, the stuff, the street fennel into America, into Canada, as well as terror lords and all sorts of stuff. It's a different kind of warfare that China's been doing for a while now. Instead of going head on, which they know they can't win, they're doing it from within, and they're using Venezuela as that ground zero that's close by. So Trump shut that down. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but obviously Trump wants to have a good relationship with Russia as well, as they have that oil that they also need. So Trump is trying to figure this out here. Mark Carney hasn't made it too easy for him securing a good deal from Canada. So he's gone to Venezuela now. I thought this was interesting from this account here, 732. I work in a very specialized part of the Venezuelan oil industry. Their crude is all extremely sour and at the best has to run in refineries built to handle it, and sometimes even needs light cutter stock purchased from the Middle East. So it sounds like they're mixing it. I've been in oil all my life and I've never seen or experienced such a destructive by philosophy and nature group of people as those such as Chavez installed to run us. They've dismantled everything over the past 30 years, methodologically put off repairs to equipment to a point where much of it barely operates and will eventually have to be abandoned after the last penny is extracted. Their oil fields are severely damaged, as well as working for them has been to see the nightmare of Marxist thinking close up. It's quite the perspective across the board here. We got a couple years here to secure our country before we may have some serious problems. With all that said, today we've got Mark Carney coming out with this and saying, I spoke with Maria Corina Machado today. I affirmed Canada's support for a peaceful Venezuelan-led transition of power, one that respects the democratic will of the Venezuelan people. He's trying to get the left back. He's losing NDP supporters as we speak because he came out with such a soft, mushy, non-committal response to Maduro being captured. And right away, Wyatt's calling him out here, saying affirmed Canada's support. Dude, you undermined what the United States did yesterday by implying it didn't respect international law. He stuck his nose up to Donald Trump in America yesterday, saying that. I don't know how Carney thinks he's going to be able to get a deal doing all this stupid stuff, like recognizing Palestine when America was clearly on the opposite side of that.